Good morning, everybody, and afternoon or evening, and thank you from wherever you're joining us around the world. Welcome to the Equitable AI Community of Practice. My name is Sachi Doshi, and I lead the Emerging Technologies team at USAID. Along with my colleagues at DAI and the Atlantic Council's Geotech Center, USAID is so excited to co-facilitate this community of practice and to bring us all together. We have a really fantastic lineup of speakers today, so I hope that you'll use this opportunity to ask a lot of questions and engage with the rest of this community. But before we jump into that lineup, I just want to take a moment to introduce our opening speaker, Clinton White, who serves as the counselor for the U.S. Agency for International Development. As counselor, one of Mr. White's foremost priorities is to advance diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, which is a core goal of this particular challenge and this community of practice as well. And he's also committed to elevating the role of responsible digital technology and innovation to help address some of the most pressing challenges in global development. The counselor has a very long and illustrious career as a Foreign Service officer and a leader at USAID for almost 20 years. He has served all around the world as a Foreign Service officer. He was in Egypt, in Pakistan, in Senegal, in Ghana, in Libya, and most recently, he served as USAID's regional representative to the Eastern and Southern Caribbean region. And he has always, through this long career, championed working with local and municipal governments. So hopefully you'll find our topic today about good governance when it comes to promoting gender equity in AI. Interesting. And he's also forged lots of multi-stakeholder partnerships to address critical challenges, ranging from climate change to food insecurity and economic growth, and many others. If I went through all of his contributions and his achievements, we would take the whole hour. So I will stop there. But we just want to say how thankful we are that Clinton has taken a few minutes from his extremely busy schedule to join us today. Clinton, we're so happy to have you. Over to you.
No, thank you so much, Sachi. And it's really great to be here with all of you. And I want to welcome everyone to this Equitable AI community of practice. As Sachi said, I am the agency counselor here, and on behalf of USAID, I want to welcome you today to this timely and pressing conversation around gender inclusive AI governance. So as the counselor, one of my chief priorities is to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout USAID's work. So when Sachi invited me to participate in this particular event, I was elated to learn about all the work that Equitable AI Challenge grantees and many in this community are doing to champion more fair AI systems. This is an urgent task. There is no question in my mind that AI is a powerful tool with global reach, affecting all the issues that we care about as an international development agency. From healthcare to education, from climate change to upholding the principles of democracy, all sectors are impacted by AI systems. But there is a lot of work to be done to ensure that despite its prominence, AI is used to benefit all and not just a privileged few. USAID strongly believes in being a responsible steward of this powerful technology by advancing inclusive AI, building partnerships and communities, and strengthening the AI ecosystems with our partner countries. This is the vision we have laid out in our AI action plan. The Equitable AI Challenge and this community of practice are important ways in which we are working towards this goal. And this brings me to why we are here today. Just as we are making leaps with AI advances, we also need to find ways to build guardrails and frameworks to navigate the adoption of these technologies in an ethical and responsible manner. This should not and cannot be an afterthought. Today, we will hear from an impressive lineup of speakers and panelists who are working at the forefront of national and international principles and policy on AI that can help us to build these guardrails. I don't need to convince you why these frameworks are important. AI is moving so fast, and we need to ensure that these tools don't entrench existing inequalities that teach girls, women, and minority groups further behind in the global digital divide. We need more standards, smart policies, and institutional capacity to build checks and balances into AI systems and how they are used. We also need to work and partner with those who are working in the trenches and understand their local context so that institutional norms reflect the realities on the ground and represent a global majority. This community of practice was built with the intention to reflect, learn, iterate, and try again. I'm truly delighted to learn from you, and I hope you are also taking advantage of this group to lean on each other, build a network, collaborate, grow, share your learnings and insights back. This is your community, and I urge you to use this space to inform our collective actions too. Together, I suspect we can make a dent towards a world of more equitable AI. Thank you for your tireless work to make technology and AI work not just for a fortunate few, but in the service of the global majority. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Clinton. That's very inspiring, and we hope that we can take that charge seriously as we move forward with this community and with the work that we're doing through our challenge and that all of our community members are doing. I'm going to turn over now to introduce Genevieve Smith, who is our Gender and AI Fellow at USAID and DAI for this Equitable AI Challenge that we're running. She wears many impressive hats, and so this is going to take a second. She's an associate director at the Center for Equity, Gender, and Leadership at the Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley, where she's working to advance equity and inclusion within teams, organizations, and technologies. She's also a research affiliate at the Minderoo Center for Technology and Democracy at Cambridge University. She holds a master's in development practice from UC Berkeley. And if all of this wasn't enough, she is concurrently also a doctoral candidate at Oxford University, exploring artificial intelligence, gender, and design justice. So she's the perfect person to be managing and facilitating our conversation today. I don't know how she juggles all of these roles so beautifully, but I know that having worked with her, that through all of her hard work, she's very committed to advancing gender equity and justice in an increasingly digital and automated world. So we're very lucky to have her, and we're really looking forward to this discussion today. Thank you, Genevieve, and to our fantastic speakers. I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Great. Thank you so much, Sachi, for that introduction. And thank you, Clinton, for those opening remarks as well. Very inspiring. Well, I'm thrilled to jump in today and be able to moderate our panel with Dr. Kelly Stone and Dr. Sarah Myers-West. As a brief introduction about these two very impressive women, Kelly is a policy development and research advisor in Cape Town and provides technical expertise to national and regional bodies in developing norms and standards, as well as policies and protocols related to the implications of AI and emerging tech on human rights, especially related to gender. She's also led development of capacity building programs for policymakers across Africa and Asia related to responsible and ethical use of AI. And Sarah is the managing director of the AI Now Institute and recently served a term as a senior advisor in AI at the Federal Trade Commission. She holds decades of policy and research experience in political economy of the tech industry and has a forthcoming book that I'm very excited to read, Tracing Code, that examines the origins of commercial surveillance. So welcome, Kelly and Sarah. Really excited to get going on our panel with the two of you. And just to kick us off, Kelly, your work at the Global Index on Responsible AI explores progress on responsible AI globally. And curious, how do you define responsible AI? Can you share more about what the initiative is finding?
Sure. Thanks, Genevieve. I'm very excited to be here and be a part of this exciting panel. So the basic premise held by the Global Index is that responsible AI imposes a series of obligations upon actors within the AI ecosystem in relation to the social and environmental impacts of their decision-making processes and activities on individuals, communities, and the broader society. So in this regard, we take the notion of responsible AI to be inclusive of both trustworthy and ethical AI, but in a way that is arguably more defined and concrete. So part of our work at the Global Index is ensuring that this conceptual understanding of responsible AI in terms of obligations is integrated into a series of benchmarks and standards against which we can measure countries around the world. Another key goal of the Global Index is to broaden the concept and deepen the practice of responsible AI to account for a diverse range of perspectives from across the world, specifically the Global South, and really to provide a basis for assessing the relevance of responsible AI to countries across the globe.
Amazing, thank you. Yeah, that work is so important and really excited to kind of hear more about it. And kind of building off that a bit, so Sarah, you've done so much work in the space of AI, gender, and power, including looking at the ways that power can be entrenched in AI systems. And I'm curious, is there anything you'd like to add around your own perspectives on this idea of responsible AI and trends that you're observing?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that we're having this conversation because these are long-standing issues that I think are increasingly important as, we're in a moment where there's a significant rush to deploy AI systems in every front possible. I think it's really key to remember that by design, AI systems they're essentially applied statistics. They're designed for looking for patterns in large sets of data, data that's culled from the world around us. And as such, AI systems are going to be inclined toward reflecting back and in many ways amplifying at larger scale existing patterns of inequality. In that, in it seeking to address those dynamics of power and inequality in AI, I think it's important to look at it from two perspectives. One is foregrounding questions about who is disproportionately harmed by these systems, and that will reflect back, existing patterns of societal discrimination. I think it's also really important, though, to keep in frame, where benefits may be disproportionately accruing to certain groups, who is gaining by the deployment of AI, and to bring those underlying questions almost as a diagnostic tool to, larger regulatory and policy questions about, where it's appropriate to be using AI, what kinds of guardrails are needed, which I think, by virtue of the way that these systems work, needs to look at those broader, underlying causes of inequality that exist beyond the technology itself.
Yeah, I really like that kind of, tying the ways that power and AI are connected to thinking about policy, because there's so much to unpack there, and we really need to think holistically about developing policies and thinking about governance. So clearly, policies and governance are needed. And I'm curious, what might gender inclusive or feminist AI governance look like? What could you imagine that would look like? And how might policymakers help move us towards gender equitable AI applications? So just a small question, and maybe let's start with Sarah.
Sure. I mean, I think that there are some straightforward low bar answers to this, who's in the room in policy discussions, who's being listened to, what kind of work counts. Often things like technical expertise are defined in ways that are exclusionary. And so thinking very holistically about, what counts as an expert opinion in informing policy conversations is key to ensuring that those who are affected by these systems are front and center in conversations about their governance.
Kelly, anything you'd like to add to that?
Sure, thank you. I've just kind of following up on what Sarah was saying about the implications of power, really kind of at every phase of AI development and deployment. And so I think that there are really kind of two key limitations in current approaches to AI policy development and governance. And one is that policies, as we currently look at them, tend to kind of only look at one stage of the AI lifecycle. And so we need to look at the power implications that exist, specifically the gendered implications that exist at every stage of the AI lifecycle. And this can kind of be broadly understood in terms of 6 key stages. So that's data collection and processing, planning and design, model building and interpretation, verification and validation, deployment, and then operation and monitoring. So we need to make sure that we are applying a gendered lens and looking at the gendered implications at every single stage of the AI lifecycle, not simply in the deployment of AI applications, and then checking to see who is harmed and who benefits. We need to look at throughout all stages. And then the other thing I think that we need to be mindful of is our understanding of what, and we need to interrogate what a gender inclusive or feminist AI policy looks like. We need to ensure that we're not kind of being limited by the limitations of kind of conventional binary understanding of what gender is, and that we're not just simply looking at policies that invest in women and girls and to the exclusion of non-binary folks, transgender persons and intersex persons. And also similarly, we need to also bear in mind that gender inclusive policies will inevitably include sexual minorities. So we also need to look at the implications on lesbian, gay, bisexual and asexual folks as well. So policies really do need to be moving towards this truly inclusive understanding of gender, kind of encompassing all of these various facets.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that the call out of making sure it's across all stages of the AI lifecycle, like you said, not just deployment, not just thinking about data and who's represented in data, but really looking at and thinking about this across the lifecycle. And to your point, Sarah, thinking about who's in the room, of course, we need to be considering that, and also, yeah, making sure there's equity across who's included in these policy discussions and whose voices get represented or not. So, some big goals here. What do you see as some of the largest challenges as we try to move towards these more feminist AI, more gender equitable AI application, more feminist policy for AI and gender equitable AI applications? Kelly, Sarah, go for it.
Sure. So a couple of things that strike me. One is, the recent, refocusing of the conversation around AI towards issues of safety and innovation. The way that these discourses are proceeding is often framed in ways that are excluding feminist or intersectional harms. They're sort of positioning the harms as, being around sort of securitization of the technology, which is not, it's not unimportant, but it doesn't include this sort of broader frame of, power and inequality in these systems. So I think really, again, foregrounding the importance of attending to power in these systems and the ways that they're impacting people in the here and now remains a very critical issue, and one that, at this particular moment needs more attention.
Anything to add on that, Kelly?
Yeah, just to follow up, I think that, and it's kind of a reiteration of my point that I earlier made, I think that one of our biggest limitations is just our tendency to stick within conventional understanding of what, where we need to be concerned about the implications of gender in the use of AI. And again, I think that's limited often to the deployment of AI systems and not into every stage of the AI lifecycle. And then also the limitations of just kind of conventional understandings around what gender is and what gender isn't, and what inclusive policies look like, and the kind of unintentional ways in which we can be very exclusionary in our attempt to promote equitable AI to advance gender equality. So I see those as being kind of two real limitations, which is why engagements such as these are just so important in terms of broadening the discourse and making sure that we're having really thoughtful and deliberate conversations that bring in a lot of different interdisciplinary backgrounds and perspectives.
Absolutely. So as we think about AI policy, AI ethics and principles can be really important in informing what types of policies are put in place. But these AI ethics and principles tend to reflect Euro-American values and universals. Why might it be important to decenter Western perspectives as we think about AI ethics and global AI policy? And what might this look like and what challenges exist? So again, just a small question, but maybe Kelly, I'll turn this to you as something that the Global Index on Responsible AI perhaps has been thinking about.
Thanks, Genevieve. This point is essential. And again, one of the kind of key focus of what the Global Index on Responsible AI is doing is making sure that we disrupt the power imbalance around who's dominating the public discourse on equitable AI. And a lot of that requires that the innovation, the expertise, the perspectives that exist in the global South have a mechanism through which they not only have a seat at the table, but a very powerful voice at the table, and that people stop, pause, and really begin to listen and adhere to and allow those voices and experiences to drive global agendas. To be truly equitable, we need to make really deep concerted efforts to disrupt the power imbalance that exists. I think the UNESCO recommendation on ethical AI has been an outlier in this. I think if we look at the development of what that recommendation involved and who was involved in it, it really did set a global standard of what it could look like. And going forward, it's just kind of trying to make sure that we advance truly globally inclusive perspectives. And it takes a lot of time. But I do think that if we don't do it that way, then we're going to really, we're just going to exacerbate existing power imbalance here.
Absolutely. Sarah, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, very little to add. I'm sure that I'm preaching to the choir here in underscoring the importance of, foregrounding, the interests of the majority world in these policy conversations, and ensuring that, the regulatory approach does not reinforce the same patterns of, the export of technologies from Western countries to the rest of the world. Like we can't also be exporting, templatized policy approaches into contexts that are very nuanced and culturally specific. And so I think balancing that with an attention to rights-based frameworks is going to be really key, and meaningfully foregrounding the communities who are affected by AI systems is critically important here.
Definitely. And so looking forward, what policies do you see forthcoming regarding AI? Are we optimistic or hopeful about the emergence of AI policy that can help guide us towards some of the things that we're talking about and more equitable applications of AI? Feel free, either one of you, to jump in.
I think we're in an environment of tremendous regulatory uncertainty at the moment, where there's a lot of proposals on the table and little clarity on, what's going to move and have teeth. So a few things to foreground here. One is that, as many folks on this call I'm sure already know, the EU is in the process of negotiating in the trilogue phase the EU AI Act, which would be, the first real large omnibus AI regulation. And so that's going to have tremendous downstream effects on policy measures globally. The US, there's a whole number of different policy proposals on the table, and we'll see what sort of catches wind. But I think also looking to the ways that the enforcement of existing law can foreground concerns about gender and race and disability is really key here too. And there, I think we've seen some helpful movement from US enforcers, from EU enforcers, and elsewhere that will, I think, provide a swifter path toward regulatory scrutiny of the way that AI systems are affecting people.
Kelly, anything from your end?
Not much to add other than the fact that I do think there's reason to be optimistic because this is truly such a nascent field. And I do think that we are having really important discussions around the implications of AI from a human rights-based perspective, from a gender perspective, probably more so and on more of a global scale than we've had really about anything before. So there's reason to be optimistic, even though there is a long way to go. And so much of this is really kind of trial and error, I think. But the more, again, we kind of create platforms like this, I think the more we can get it into the public consciousness, which is the first step.
Yeah, absolutely. I find a lot of hope and optimism in these kinds of conversations and spaces, right? And hearing about the different work that people are pushing forward. So holding on to that, absolutely. And the last question before we get into some great presentations, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end. So just a note to everyone in the virtual room, think about any questions that you have and use the Q&A function. We'll be coming back to questions for Kelly and Sarah and a couple of presentations that we'll be having at the end. So feel free to start populating some questions in that Q&A. But the last question I have for this current panel is, any tips around how practitioners in this group that are committed towards advancing equitable AI could better engage with regulators, government agencies, or be part of these different conversations?
All right, I'm happy to jump in. I think one of the most useful things to do in the present moment is to draw on the really robust evidence base that we already have around, the inequitable impacts of AI to, like, in policy conversations, to really foreground that we have tangible, concrete evidence of harms, of disproportionate benefits, and to leverage that in the push to act. I think one of the most harmful recent moves that I've seen take place is this the invigoration of this notion that we don't have evidence of how AI is affecting people, that this is too nascent. And I think pushing back on that to say, actually, we've had, automated decision-making systems and other forms of AI biometrics in deployment for a long time. And we have a really substantial body of evidence here to draw on, and proposals already on the table, ready to go, to be able to act and intervene to ensure that AI is working in the interests of the broad public.
And perhaps just to add on that would be to build as kind of interdisciplinary, diverse teams as possible. I think bringing in people with a diverse range of expertise, perspectives, specific to gender, are really important in policy discussions. But also, again, as practitioners and developers of AI systems, to recognize that there are going to be things that you will need to be aware of that, through no fault of your own, just the limitations of your own discipline, you may not be aware of. So to kind of invite dissenting voices and hard to hear information, because that will be just critical to integrate into the very design of these AI products and solutions. and to, as Sarah was saying, to rely on the existing body of evidence that currently exists, but also to recognize that there are gaps, and that bringing in again as inclusive and globally representative voices as you can, especially if your intention is to deploy your solutions outside of a specific region or country. So yeah, that's it.
Amazing. Well, thank you both. Really appreciate your comments and thoughts, and yeah, really inspired by this conversation. So I'm excited to turn it now to 2 flash presentations we'll have. And again, folks are in the virtual room, leave some questions in the Q&A. We'll be bringing Kelly and Sarah back for that Q&A in a little bit here. But I would like to introduce Rutendo to start. So Rutendo is at the Oxford Internet Institute as a PhD candidate and recipient of the 2023 Meta PhD Fellowship. Her research explores the citizenship experiences of women and queer individuals engaging with the state on social media, with Zimbabwe as a case study. And outside her PhD research, she researches and advocates the importance of feminist perspectives in digital governance and AI regulation. So she combines feminist and political theories with science and technology studies to offer unique African perspectives to the field. So I'm thrilled to introduce Rutendo and pass it over to her. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Genevieve. So yes, my research that I would like to talk about today is a feminist analysis of regional AI policies in the context of conversations on AI for development on the African continent specifically. So the discourse centers AI as a tool for leapfrogging and economic advancement when we think about AI for development as it is called. However, as we know that women and gender minorities are underrepresented in AI spaces and are disproportionately harmed by AI technologies as a result of this exclusion, as previous speakers have greatly highlighted. I am considering this feminist analysis of AI regional African policies as a critical interrogation of the development discourse as well, because what is development through AI if it is exclusionary? I decided to look at African regional bodies, the African Union and the Southern African Development Committee, SADC specifically, because they are standard setters. So they set the floor of expectations of countries within the region. So while some individual countries within the region are really doing well, those with more authoritarian regimes or those with less involved policymaking bodies need to adhere to these regional standards. So in the realm of this research that I did, there were 2 significant gaps that I observed and sort of made recommendations towards addressing. Firstly, there's a lack of strategic and pragmatic framing of AI, which is evident. One crucial example to address this issue is one crucial principle, to address this issue is to connect AI and its sub-areas with specific tangible examples of AI-relevant applications, patents, projects, etc. Regrettably, this connection, although it sounds very, very simple and important, is actually absent in several documents. For example, we have the ICT African Continent Integrated Plan, which was supposed to be between 2015 and 2020. It aims to promote gender-inclusive education to narrow the gender digital divide. However, it failed to link this initiative directly to AI and its role in development, leaving it less effective in guiding AI implementation for development. So to overcome such gaps, I recommend that policies should explicitly include industry or sector-specific references to AI, reducing the likelihood of gender disparities. By specifically addressing AI and AI-related skills in development and gender policies, we can then bridge the technology gap and ensure progress in gender equality. Notably, there's an upcoming African Union AI Continental Strategy for Africa that's supposed to launch in January 2024. And I hope it sort of holds promise for addressing some of these strategic issues. Secondly, the other gap is that existing policies lack adequate gender specificity, particularly in acknowledging the gendered harms that AI can perpetuate or create. So even in cases where specific industries are mentioned, that is, in specific cases where a strategic approach is attempted, the impact on gender equality remains overlooked. So for instance, the SADC Regional Indicative Strategic Plan, which is supposed to extend from 2020 to 2030, focuses on infrastructure development for regional integration, but it does not adequately address women's disadvantages. So it talks about certain achievements such as significant broadband access and significant increase in digitization and access to digital tools, but it does not actually look at how women's mobile internet access and internet access in general lags behind men's by large margins in the regions. So to rectify this gap of the absence of gender specificity, I think two measures would be important. And the first would be gender mainstreaming should be incorporated at every stage of AI and development efforts, ensuring that gender perspectives are considered in monitoring, evaluation, and learning procedures. And then secondly, gender protocols related to development must integrate AI consideration to holistically mainstream gender in the development discourse. So regardless of whether or not we're talking about AI directly, or we're talking about things that have to do with gender or just development, we need to understand that AI is a cross-cutting issue and not just a tech issue. It is an issue to do with society, with the politics, and with the economy as well. So by explicitly including AI's role in gender inequality, we can ensure that AI becomes an integral part of development conversations rather than an afterthought or a simple tag-on. But sort of bringing this out from just narrowing down to the African context, I think in conclusion, I'd like to sort of talk about strategically linking AI to tangible examples and policies, and also just three major learnings for gender equitable AI in Africa and globally as well. And I think the first learning is the importance of gender inclusive data practices, as has already been discussed. So gender equitable AI is built using inclusive data practices, including things such as consent and privacy, that take into account power dynamics evident in society. And it is important that we understand that different societies have different power dynamics that manifest different. And gender equitable AI is not just based on sex disaggregated data built for women and girls, or developed elsewhere and imposed on people in lower capacity countries, which leads to the second important major learning. It is important to consider the geopolitical capacity imbalance between who produces AI and who uses it, as well as how this affects who has the power to govern what aspects of it. So in order to sort of address this and to unpack these power dynamics, local knowledge needs to be prioritized. One approach to this is to plan and conduct all research locally and action it with local communities. This builds an understanding of what is actually happening with AI in less sort of powerful contexts, such as the African continent. And then we can start to develop things from an Afrofeminist perspective, for example. And the third and final learning is the importance of cross-industry or cross-functional or interdisciplinary, there's multiple ways to think about this, collaborations. That is to say that AI is not just to be developed or thought about by those that are technical and have those technical skills like coding capabilities or understand machine learning, but it's important that to involve everyone because, as previously discussed, it is a cross-cutting issue, so to speak. So in conclusion, it is important to note that these harms are not unique to the African continent, they are global, and it is as important that we continue to interrogate the development discourse around AI and not just the use of AI as a tool for said development. Thank you.
Thank you, Rutendo. Great, so we have one more flash presentation and then we'll be going to the Q&A. I see lots of questions coming in. Thank you everyone for putting those in. So I'd like to introduce Paula Galvez Calleros. She is an experienced lawyer with a solid track record in advising on and crafting regulatory responses for sensitive issues of cybersecurity, privacy, and AI to the Peruvian government and big tech companies, with a focus on closing gender and digital skill gaps. She's a policy researcher and a former consultant strategic advisor at the Digital Regulations of the Government of Peru and a Master of Public Policy candidate at the University of Oxford. Over to you, Paula.
Thank you, Genevieve. Good morning with everyone, or good afternoon from wherever you are joining. To me, it's very important to be joining this relevant discussion. And also, you didn't mention, but I'm also an AI Connect Fellow. It's also a program of the Atlantic Council, so I'm really glad to be here. Yes, I will be sharing with you some insights from my experience advising the Peruvian government. And now I'm also doing some projects with the OECD. But these are 8 main highlights or messages that I would like to share with you as a food for thought. So first of all, what are the gender provisions that we managed to establish in the national AI strategy? Specifically, Axis 1 about development of digital skills, which is a strategic objective number 4. It states that the Peruvian society, because it's not just a government affair, but also including the private sector, civil society, and academia, we must reduce the gap of participation of women in AI training programs. And here I could add that we may face some questions, or why shall we do only female programs? But here I need to say that when we are working on public policy programs to develop skills, we need to be focusing on women and girls specifically, because that's when we start thinking on what we can become when we are adults. And we need, especially in countries such as Peru, girls to start doing it. And I drafted a program of digital skills in Peru, which is called Digital Girls Peru. At first, the question was, why only girls? We need to engage everyone, but here we need to push for more women in STEM, and specifically women in artificial intelligence. So this was the first, and what we managed to include in the AI strategy. Second, very recently, the Peruvian Congress approved law number 31814, which is the law that promotes the use of AI in favor of the economic and social development of the country. Here, it's very important to say that without equity, specifically gender equity, there will not be more social or economic development in Peru. Therefore, now that the presidency of the Council of Ministers is in charge of drafting these regulations, we need to draft these with gender lenses. I will be participating in the multi-stakeholder roundtables to discuss these regulations. So this is one more leg of what is the AI governance in the Peruvian context. Third is the gender action plan. What we want to establish is how the Peruvian society will go from law to action. And here, as Isidora mentioned by Sarah, I believe we are considering the UNESCO's recommendation on the ethics of AI to take a whole of a government approach action plan where we want to achieve gender equality, and specifically working in cross collaboration with different ministers and agencies in the Peruvian government. What are also, and you will see in my slide, I'm talking about capacity building and female entrepreneurship. Those are two important matters to consider. First, to have regulatory and economic incentives for female entrepreneurs, have more AI startups led by women, and at the same time working with them to develop their digital skills to work on more equitable AI. The last 2 points that I would like to point is I saw a big challenge in terms of not considering the cultural context when we're drafting this AI governance. Peru is a society with different cultures, so it's a multicultural society. Therefore, as we've mentioned before in the panel, we need to consider who is sitting in the table. And it's not just with having one woman in the table, but a woman from different regions, and consider an intersectional approach. It's mandatory, in my opinion. The last point would be, we're seeing more than ever global discussions. Last week, the UN Secretary General embraced goals for a new UN agency on AI, for instance, in the face of these existential risks. I appreciate that, but it is important that the Global South is not left behind. And as I wrote in my slide, we must give Southern populations the tools to engage with the questions that are affecting us. I was at the IT Youth Global Summit a couple of weeks ago, thanks to the Atlantic Council, and I miss that, the Global South perspectives. So if we are going towards global discussions and a global regulation or agency, it's very important that our voices are considered, and we need to take action on what we're saying. My very last point, and it's very important to highlight that the Peru's digital transformation law establishes it's mandatory that any digital regulation, this includes AI, shall be drafted considering a multi-stakeholder approach. And that's something that I'm very proud of saying that the Peruvian government is implementing. So yeah, we should always consider civil society, academia, and all these fantastic women that are working on AI right now. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Great, thank you so much, Paula. And I'd love to call back our other panelists to chat through some Q&A. We have some great questions that have come in. So maybe just to kick us off, and I believe we could bring back Kelly and Sarah on this main screen as well. So maybe just an initial question. So as we increase from Robert, thank you, Robert. So as we increase the amount of training data that comes from non-European or US sources, Robert notes, we will inevitably be including more content that includes rejection of women's equality, sexual minorities, and gender diversity. How would our speakers suggest dealing with this? Reactions, thoughts? And maybe to kind of phrase it in another way as well. So as we think about including different training data for different types of AI technologies that might be embedding gender inequality or inequality related to sexual orientation, how do we grapple and deal with this?
I can jump in quickly. I mean, I think one of the frontline challenges is that at present, the trend within industry is toward less and less disclosure of what's in the training data. We simply don't know what many of these systems are being trained on. And so as a baseline, talking about the ways that training data can shape the inequality produced by these systems when they're deployed into products is a key measure to push for stronger disclosures about data in the first place. So I don't think we're even at a place yet where we can meaningfully grapple with these underlying questions about what's going in the training data, because we just aren't even receiving those disclosures to begin with. And I guess one other note too is that, we can't think about data in isolation, because data in and of itself, is not particularly useful without some sort of annotation or screening for quality. And particularly as we're moving towards larger scale AI, incorporating human feedback or ratings into the training process is also key. So this question, I think, is very much also linked to, the working conditions of the workers who are involved in those training processes, the guidelines that they're being given to shape the way that they're using annotation or labeling or rating practices. All of these things will have downstream effects on what the model produces, and almost none of it is open to scrutiny at present. Most of what we know is the product of either worker-led organizing or investigative journalism.
Thank you, Sarah. And so one other question that has gotten upvote as well, so folks feel free to upvote questions in the Q&A that you might be particularly interested in the audience. So in many countries, laws meant to regulate harmful uses of digital tech and AI are flipped to target activists, people outside the gender binary, minority groups, etc. How can responsible AI policy also cascade down to help regulate how national laws are written and enforced to protect the access to AI in digital/tech spaces generally, rather than used to target users in ways meant to limit voices in the tech, digital, and AI space. Who'd like to jump in?
I'm happy to jump in here. I think that this is where other human rights instruments and human rights laws and just kind of laws around civil and political liberties become really, really important when we're looking at the development of responsible AI policies and responsible AI laws. So we need to make sure that, again, human rights really form the foundation and the benchmarks against which we are measuring the constitutionality, the legality of what AI is used for and what it shouldn't be used for. And in certain jurisdictions, these protections will be more pronounced and will be more effectively enforced than others. But I think bringing them out into more global discussions is a useful way to again kind of shed light on these very risks.
Great, thank you. Any Paola, Rotendo, any other thoughts you want to add to the question so far?
I think just to add on to what Kelly has said, if I may, is it's that understanding that like these AI laws or AI regulation does not exist in a vacuum. It is a part of a much larger instruments and bodies and other laws. So addressing just that will not actually address the context in which things happen. So it is important that when we think of AI, we think about everything else within the context. It is, in a lot of cases, it is a symptom of a much larger problem. And so strengthening the other policy areas as well will therefore, in turn, strengthen responsible AI policy. So I think when we have these discussions, it is important that we take that sort of interdisciplinary, I cannot think of a better, I don't know what word to use, but that sort of larger approach to consider other things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Great, and to sneak in one other question that's come in, how do you respond to concerns that over-regulating AI could lead to less advancement and usefulness?
I can jump in on this. Actually, I remember when we started discussing the AI strategy, right before a law, it's just a strategy. We get a lot of this pushback, especially from entrepreneur side, the private sector at big scale. And that is why it's so important that the government takes this multi-stakeholder approach, because we wanted to be there as well, sitting in the table to tell us why this kind of provision would prevent them to keep following their innovations. Definitely, Peru, it's a developing country. We want more startups. We don't have any unicorn yet, so we want that to flourish. But at the same time, we need to keep citizens safe online. Therefore, this multi-stakeholder discussion is so important. I would say I've been working on this tech policy for more than 10 years. There will always be pushbacks, but we need to consider that these risks are so important that we cannot just leave them aside anymore. So that's why our governments are starting to get this concern, and we need to start working on this. Maybe sandbox are good solutions for this. Peru has not worked on this yet, unfortunately, but Colombia is a good example in South America. And when there are startups that want to work on, let's say, a new development with AI, the government allows it in a, let's say, a small place where we can be watching how it's developing and considering the risk, so we can fail, but immediately try to work on it, so we avoid having a bigger population getting harmed. But that's my take on this.
Thank you so much, Paola. And as we're kind of reaching the hour here, I just want to thank Paola, Rotendo, Kelly, Sarah for joining this conversation. It's been, lots to think about and process, so really appreciate it. And want to thank the audience as well, everyone for joining today's session. USAID, DAI, and Atlanta Council, thank you for hosting the Equitable AI Community of Practice. I'd also like to remind everyone in the audience that you can continue today's conversation on LinkedIn and also sign up for the Equitable AI Community of Practice. There's newsletters and updates, so definitely make sure to check that out. And there's also going to be a save the date for a September session on Wednesday, September 27th. So please keep an eye out for that as well. Thank you, Coley, for putting those links in the chat, the LinkedIn group and the newsletter sign up. Looking forward to continuing these conversations and seeing you all next time. Thank you so much.